Wonderful. So we have some questions that are coming through here on both Twitter and at slido.com. And let's start with, well, here's a couple of paired questions that I'll ask. It looks like the first one starts more general and then it gets more specific. So Anonymous writes, what do you predict will happen to climate change research with this new presidency? What will change? And then Branch Archer asks, what implications for climate change does Donald Trump's EPA director pick Scott Pruitt have? How far could this set back a greener future? So comment any or all as much as you want.
There's no denying that there's very serious concern in the scientific community right now. If you follow me on Facebook, you know that a couple of days ago, I wrote a post on where scientific grant money goes. Because many people seem to suspect that we scientists have a Swiss bank account that we shovel it into. What people don't realize is that when you take a huge, enormous grant and you divide it up into 5 investigators and then 5 years and then the university takes a third or a half of it, you're left with enough to pay a graduate student, buy a computer, and go to a scientific meeting. So where does this money go? This money goes to supporting the new generation of researchers. Government grants primarily pay graduate students, postdoctoral research fellows, undergraduate students, lab equipment, all aimed at understanding this world that we live in. So any attempts to, defund science leave us all poorer. Because really, funding science is the mark of a developed country. That is what gives us the quality of life that we have today. When we look at the appointments, though, it isn't just EPA. If you look at the appointments on NOAA, if you look at the appointments for the Department of Interior, if you look at the appointments for all kinds of federal agencies, people have been appointed who not only do not value the importance of science in general, as well as taking care of this planet that we all live on, but people who are actively opposed to taking care of it, as if somehow we humans could live floating in space without this planet. We are only as healthy, we are only as well off as the home that we live in. And so that's why it just makes sense to be sure that we have clean air to breathe, that we have clean water to drink, that we have ample food to eat, and that we have safe places to live.
Indeed. So another question comes from someone else who's remained anonymous. How do we effectively communicate with people who are unmoved by facts and uninterested in the truth, particularly policymakers? And kind of a follow-on question is, when I go home for Thanksgiving and Uncle Joe's at the table, and how do I talk to Uncle Joe?
Yes. I literally have an essay on how to talk to Uncle Joe, and I'm not kidding. If you go to my website, you can find it there. And I also have a global weirding video about how when the facts are not enough, how do we talk? The bottom line is this. The first thing we have to do is listen. Or if we're meeting somebody for the first time, do a little digging on them. Find out what makes them tick. Where does their heart lie? What things truly motivate or animate them? What things are they proud of? What things do they support? And then try to identify something, a worry, a concern, a love, or a value, that you genuinely share with that person. If you can't find one that you genuinely share, maybe you shouldn't be talking. But if you dig long and hard enough, you can usually find something that you can genuinely share with them, and that is the point at which the conversation should begin. It should always begin with what you share and with what you can genuinely appreciate about them. And then, once you have bonded over that, you can share from your heart why, given this shared value or concern or love that you have, why you as a person are concerned about this issue. Works for climate, works for many other issues. But never just talk about the issue, always talk about a solution that you're excited about that you think they might get on board with too. Because if you tell Uncle Joe that you're so excited that Fort Hood decided to save $168 million of taxpayer money by using wind and solar energy, you really think Uncle Joe's going to say, he might, grumble a little bit, but he's not going to say, oh, I wish they hadn't saved that money, So I know it's hard, and believe me, I know very well how hard it is. But the more we can establish our common ground at the beginning, the stronger the foundation we have to continue the conversation.
Great, thanks. Yeah. All right, another question from Anonymous. They have a lot of questions tonight.
I don't think that's fair.
I'm writing a book on the intersection of faith and cities intended for churches with a section on ways we can impact our planet. What advice do you have for me?
Wow, that's a great one. So churches are a great opportunity because churches, first of all, nearly always have budgets that they would like to reduce. And so one of the coolest things you can do in a church is do an energy audit, figure out where you're wasting all this money, and then get people involved in doing things to save money. And then what do you do with that extra money that you saved? You can do something cool, and then you can model it to people in the congregation at the same time. Because honestly, some of our biggest issues are, when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot these days, there's a million new light bulbs. Which one do you buy? Right? Has anybody ever had that problem? But imagine if your church had a table of light bulbs and you could actually test them out, see what type of light they gave, and you knew where to get them. Or imagine if your church had, the name of the energy consultant who just saved the church $10,000 in operating costs, and he could go to your house too. Churches are a great way to actually model these things to people because you have a large group of people that all share an enormous amount in common. So that's one thing I would suggest. And then the other thing too is climate change is definitely a justice issue. Just like air pollution, just like water pollution, in the same way, climate change also disproportionately affects the poor. It happens here in this country and as well as on the other side of the world. And so when churches take these issues seriously, it is a witness like none other because you can say you care, but what really matters is what you do.
Gosh, there's so many good ones here. This one's from Kimberly Cox, and it seems to reflect a number of the questions that are coming across is, how do we talk to our children about climate change and do it in a way where we don't scare them?
That is a great question. With all of us, I think, and especially with me, I look at the science every day, there is a tendency to give way to that fear and despair, but the thing is that will not keep us going. Fear and despair can motivate us so much, but it will run out on us and it will leave us drained and anxious and depressed and even eventually possibly dissociated and disengaged. So when we're talking to our kids and when we're talking to anybody, when you're talking to kids, you want to tell them the truth, but you don't just want to tell them about the impacts, you want to tell them about the solutions too. Because kids are amazing. There are all kinds of cool stories about three seventh grade girls in Florida who decided that they were going to reduce their school's carbon footprint. And they saved $30,000 in operating costs the first year by things like painting the roof white and reducing food waste and figuring out when they could leave the windows open. They were seventh grade girls. So don't underestimate the ability of kids to make change. And that's why when we tell our kids about this issue, we always absolutely want to make sure we talk about the solutions, because that is what gives us hope and that is what motivates us to change.
Here's a question from Cheryl Meredith. How can I lobby for solar panel installation on the top of the buildings at the University of Texas at Austin? How can I research costs and argue effectively?
Okay. Well, actually, I think your question answered it yourself. If you're going to lobby for that, you have to present an argument that whoever you're talking to will be attracted by. And, my university is the same way. It's got to be the bottom dollar that they benefit from. So I can't tell you who to talk to in Austin, but I'm sure there's a million people to talk to get, to price out solar panels. And do the research, get the numbers, figure out how much it would cost and how much money it would save. You can look up your university's budget in the library if they won't give you the numbers on their power bills. I learned that little trick. And that's the way to move forward. At Texas Tech, we have a National Wind Energy Institute that tests wind turbines from around the world. Do you think that wind energy goes to the university? No. But it does go into an electric co-op grid for the surrounding county area outside town. So we moved just outside town, so we now get that wind energy. But don't even get me started. How a National Wind Institute does not even have a single turbine on campus is a complete mystery to me.
Well, let me add that actually the University of Texas has now something called the Green Fee. It's been in effect for several years. It was something the students voted in a referendum on themselves, a fee that generates quite a bit of funds every year, and you could write proposals to have them funded. So Cheryl Meredith. I say, you have a proposal in the offing. All right. Here's a question from Nathan Van Oort. When talking on solutions that you can correct, what would you say to Texas citizens who have a Texas government that disregards climate change? How can they influence politics and take the lead on transforming to a renewable energy infrastructure?
Well, I would say that's already happening in Texas. I mean, if you've looked around yourself, anytime you drive anywhere in Texas, you just see more and more wind turbines going up, and we see more and more solar panels going up too, and solar farms. So the government of Texas is not opposed to job creation. And if you build a natural gas power plant versus a wind or solar farm to produce the same amount of electricity, the solar farm or the wind farm produces 8 times more local jobs in Texas. So the government is not opposed to good job creation, and they're certainly not opposed to economic benefits and cheap electricity. And Texas has actually done a lot of things right when it comes to clean energy. So I wouldn't actually say the government was so opposed to, clean energy in general. They're just opposed to it when you're saying that you want it for a specific reason, like reducing carbon emissions. So why talk about the carbon emissions? Why not talk about the other benefits of it? Figure out what you can agree with them on and why we need more of it, because it's good for our economy. That's the argument we use with somebody who only cares about the economy.
Right on. Emmanuel asks, how do those that have the most to gain financially by denying climate change reconcile the decreased survivability of their own families? Maybe not a question that you can really answer.
I have wondered that exact question.
All right. Well, I think what we'll do now is take one last question, and then we'll move to our panel, and then maybe we'll get some more questions during that time of the panel and come back to maybe one last one. So Chris writes, what's your opinion with the evidence that animal agriculture is the highest source of greenhouse gas emissions?
Oh yeah, great question. I would say the number one question I get often after a presentation is, why didn't you tell people that it's the number one cause? And my answer to that is because it isn't the number one cause. Now, I know that you've seen the movie Cowspiracy, but I'm sorry to tell you that Cowspiracy was based on one study that used the wrong numbers. They literally counted the breath coming out of the cow's mouth as part of the emissions. And I actually have published quite a few papers in the field of atmospheric methane emissions, so I do know that animal agriculture is a substantial source of carbon. And if you watch my little video from this week on global weirding, what's things that we can do individually to help and reduce our carbon footprint, eating lower on the food chain is absolutely one of those things. Rare occasions. But when we say that it's the only thing that will fix climate change, overselling it isn't actually going to fix anything. It's one of a portfolio of solutions. It's important, but there are many important things, and the number one reason why we're in this mess today is because burning coal and oil and gas produces carbon dioxide. That is the number one problem that we have today.
Thank you very much, Katharine. Let's thank Katharine for her A's to our Q's.